Batu, Marana, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new podcast, Stories Out of Time and Space, the sci-fi movie review podcast. My name's Scott Weatherly, and I'm one of your hosts, and I will be accompanied on this journey by my co-host, Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here, Scott.
Yeah, it's going to be good. We're going to be covering some exciting topics. We're going to be covering some exciting films. This podcast, it's going to cover all kinds of sci-fi films. This is going to be covering all kinds of themes, topics, any year really, and I'm excited to be covering such a sort of a vast genre. So many things we can be digging into on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for this first season, we're going to do 10 films, and we've selected them in unison, and we'll do them in chronological order.
Yeah, it's a bit of a taster's choice, a bit of a buffet, really, isn't it? It was five from me, five from you, and they're sort of just films that we wanted to talk about, and there's some interesting things in there. Some, I would say, highbrow, and some not so highbrow, but all of them actually some pretty solid films in there. I'm actually really excited to talk about.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to talk about it, and I'm sure some of them we'll both love, and some of them we'll disagree on, and have some lively conversations.
Yeah, and we're going to be starting with one that I'll be in. This one's an interesting one because of the period it was released and its impact on the genre. So today's film is Forbidden Planet from 1956, directed by Fred Wilcox, written by Cyril Hume, but based on a previous script by Alan Alda and Irving Block, starring Leslie Nielsen as Commander John Adams, Walter Pidgeon as Dr. Morbius, Anne Francis as Alteria Morbius, I might have said that completely wrong, and Warren Stevens as Lieutenant Doc Ostro. So it's got a solid cast. Some odd, when people say Leslie Nielsen these days, they think of something completely different as to what you were going to get from this film.
I don't even know who Leslie Nielsen is unless O.J. Simpson's next film.
That's yes, yeah. And that opens up a whole can of worms. So I'll give a quick synopsis of this film because I'm not entirely sure of all the films we're going to cover. There's a few that I'm not sure how many people will actually know the story. They probably know of all of them, but this one's sort of an earlier period. So a crew is sent to a remote planet, Altair 4, to investigate the reason for its radio silence. Upon arrival, the crew find that all but 2 of the colonists are dead, the victim of a mysterious planetary threat. Dr. Morbius and his daughter, Altair, try to encourage the crew to leave. However, their ship is sabotaged, which means they have to stay to finish repairs. Over time, several of the crew show an interest in Altair and find out more about the secrets Dr. Morbius is hiding, specifically advanced alien Krell technology. So that's sort of a summary, really, of the film. It doesn't cover half the things that happen, but so we'll start with a general overview of our thoughts on this film. And Julian, I'll throw it over to you. What are your thoughts, general thoughts about this film?
Well, I freaking love it. I'm amazed how much I still love it. I'm amazed how much it holds up. A few immediate thoughts upon rewatching it. I mean, first of all, I like it way more than, any Marvel movie or any blockbuster of the last 20 years. I think its special effects hold up tremendously well. I'm constantly shocked by how much I love the imagination and the special effects. And I think sometimes older movies, like I'm amazed by special effects in like the silent period where they just went for stuff that nowadays, I guess you could do it with CGI, but nowadays you'd say, oh, well, that's going to be $2 million for that, 30 seconds of CGI. And 15 years ago, they'd say, oh, well, we can't do that. That's too much prosthetics and everything else. And they just make a set or make this backdrop.
Yeah.
And you see movies from like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, where you think, oh man, this does not hold up just because the special effects look so cheesy. And this, I mean, I've never seen Forbidden Planet on the big screen. I would love to see it on the big screen. I would just, marvel at my favorite sequences where they reveal the Krell base, and it's like 20 miles this direction and 20 miles that direction, and you have so many shots where the characters are just dwarfed by this landscape, and presumably that's done with a backdrop, like it's in camera, and they've got it's not a backdrop, it's like a
matte paintings,
a mat. Yeah. But they've also got like animated things, like they've got in that big shaft, there's like stuff running up and down it, and so many there's like the footprints of the monster that appear and stuff like that I just think, I'm not even sure how they did this. So I mean, the special effects hold up. I mean, and I find that all of the sort of like antiquated stuff, and I'm sure we'll get into some of it, is just totally charming to me. I'm just totally charmed by it. There's nothing that's sort of antiquated that I think, oh, here's the, drug dealer guy, or something like that. I'm just utterly charmed by it. What about you?
No, it's interesting that for a long time, I sort of put this in that camp of kitsch nostalgia for me. I saw this in that same the same vein as the sort of Sinbad films and films of that era that like I say, the sort of like the practical effects and that sort of thing, which we will get into, which are really stunning. But going back to it, I realised how, like you say, how actually good this is. That it's not just a sort of I saw this on like Sunday afternoons as a kid, sort of like on the BBC Two and that sort of thing, but seeing it on in a HD, and you're right, it does hold up. I mean, it looks stunning. The matte paintings, I'm always impressed by matte paintings. I always find the whole process fascinating, and it looks good. The sets are they're very, very of their time, but again, like they're really good. They're really well done. I do find at times it takes itself a little serious, but overall, I agree. I would say charming is a good description. And I'm impressed by the imagination that's gone into this. There's a few things I would probably question, but the idea of this sort of things that clearly, and the first thing that hit me rewatching this, considering I've been sort of dipping into original series Trek recently, is all right. So this is where Gene Roddenberry got his ideas from.
Yeah, I have notes on that too. I thought it's stunning how much this almost serves as an early Star Trek pilot, like Before the Cage.
Yeah.
They mention the United Planets. There's that weird teleportation sequence. I'm kind of confused by what they're doing, but they have a teleporter, even though they land on the planet. They have phasers. They have the effects of that. There's like even red shirts. There's a view screen. And it does seem as if, this really is almost a Star Trek pilot.
Yeah, I say all the elements are there. Like even the crew, like there's almost like the, as I hear referred to as the best friends gang. You've got the sort of the commander or the captain, a doctor who's his best friend, and then you've got these other characters that sort of like, it's surprising that there's no connection other than I'm sure Gene Roddenberry watched it and was like, that I want to build on that. But again, like I say, it's obviously it's being sort of obviously quite post World War II. The idea of almost like non-militaristic military force, like traveling around the cosmos, investigating and making sure that other people are safe, these colonists and stuff. It feels sort of that sort of 50s. It could have been a lot more aggressive Do you know what I mean? That I feel they're not like
Mm-hmm.
the guns they have are self protection. They use them as they're a sidearm for the commander and the doctor and all the other crew members. But at no point, they could have easily had this where they come just marching off the ship in military fashion, and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. Like that's almost how I'd expect this film to be like today.
Mm-hmm.
But they are almost like they're portrayed almost like as an investigative, sort of reconnaissance force, even though they say like, oh, I know we're, hundreds of thousands of light years away from Earth. It seems like some brave choices were made, making this film.
Yeah, and you don't really find out anything about this United Planets, right? I mean, obviously, it's sort of episodic in the sense that, I mean, it feels like sort of Star Trek in that sense too. But you're right. I mean, I think not only is it not, I mean, they follow military command structure like they do on Star Trek, but I mean, they're, one of the characters is his primary concern seems to be getting alcohol, and I mean, they're hitting on, the Skrull Alta, and I mean, that's also very Star Trek. But it's remarkable hearing you talk. I thought it's remarkable how little sort of patriotic jingoism there is for this period, right? I mean, because you could easily have done this, and there'd be like, talk about, on Earth we believe in democracy, or this kind of dumb jingoism of the post-war period, and that's not there.
Well, and there's an opportunity for that. I mean, to jump forward into the plot, and when we get to it, is when it's revealed that Dr. Mobius has had access to this incredibly advanced alien technology that's it's boosted his brain power, it's allowed him to build Robbie the robot and survive on this planet and all this other stuff. And he actually says to them, he says, the commander, Leslie Nielsen, John Adams, says, "Oh, we've got to take this back to Earth. This is fantastic. All this technology that we can use." And Dr. Mobius steps in and is like, "No, I will dictate when this can be sent back, and what I will basically drip feed it back to Earth." And whilst they're challenging him on it, there is none of that jingoistic challenge that there could have been. Again, it could have gone a very different route of like, you are not one to dictate to us, and we could save millions of lives, and rah rah rah. It could have gone a very different tact. But at no point,
right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is the perfect place where you could have inserted that, right?
And that's it. Like I say, it feels like they could have gone down that line. They could have been saying like, that militaristic, think of all the things we could achieve with this kind of thing, which you probably would have seen, and you will see in other films of this period. So to hold back and to have that restraint, like the film clearly has a certain message that it wants to convey around that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, I mean, I think that a lot of the sci-fi that I really love from, earlier periods, I mean, it's even true of like Planet of the Apes, right? I mean, Planet of the Apes feels very episodic. I mean, it feels like a Twilight Zone episode. It's just longer and really good. I think that's true of, a lot of these earlier movies. I think, I mean, King Kong is just as pulpy as this, probably more so, and people don't have any problem acknowledging that as a classic. So, I mean, I guess that, it does have that very episodic quality, and maybe that's a thing to ding it for some people, but I just find it a very charming story that also has like you said, a sort of unexpected depth. It doesn't have that militarism. There's obviously a certain psychological view here. There's a kind of literary view. I mean, the whole thing is pretty clearly modeled on The Tempest. And in fact, you had the Freudian slip in describing the plot where you said an island instead of a planet. Yeah, right, because it's Prospero, right?
Yeah.
And I love the religious stuff too.
Well, I agree. Because there are so many levels to this that you do pick up on things, and in the research, you find out more about sort of its links with The Tempest, and it's quite interesting to see people try and sort of the main character of, so say, Morbius being Prospero is, you know, the obvious one, and his daughter and that. But then everyone, they try and sort of as it's Caliban, they sort of people saying, oh, it's this character, it's that character, and so it's not. There's no direct correlation, but you can definitely take out the similar themes. And I do like the idea of you know, Morbius being this sort of, not quite the sorcerer that Prospero is, but like that advanced being. Like, he clearly is smarter than this. You know, this they are quite militaristic, but this space crew, like he has a better handle on what's going on than they do. And so it's interesting that he does, you know, he's played with almost like indifference rather than arrogance. I don't know about your thoughts on that, but I always find he's interesting because, again, they could have played it with this almost like contempt. You know, like I'm just better than you now. I've advanced beyond your, you know, ridiculous notions of whatever. But he's never that. There is always that sort of element of, all right, well, I've gone through this, but I'm trying to sort of better my humanity, but it's still there, which I find Mobius an interesting character in that respect.
Yeah, and I think that fits with your point about it not being militaristic. It doesn't really have a bad guy. I mean, obviously, Morbius is the antagonist, but he's, you know, he seems a little arrogant, but he's clearly not evil. I mean, he winds up, having created the monster that's threatening the planet, but it's literally unconscious. I mean, it's not intended. He's not a bad guy. And even when he's clearly he withholds information and then kind of rolls it out slightly over the movie, and you know that he's holding back and he knows more than he's saying, but it's not malicious, and you can easily see how, I mean, if you are already a genius and now you got a brain boost and you're twice as smart, you might be a little arrogant about these people coming to rescue you who you don't think are required. It's sad this crew is dead, but my daughter and I don't need rescuing here, and I'm actually doing very important work, and thank you very much. But bugger off.
It is interesting. I mean, the one thing I sort of when I got to the end of the film, and I thought back on what Morbius is doing, is this concept of, like, he's advanced himself. He's obviously built advanced technology in both his home and Robbie the Robot and other bits and pieces based off the alien Krell technology. And he has this notion of, okay, well, now you're here, I'm going to drip feed this to, Earth. Like, we'll give them bits and pieces. Like, all right, I'll show them how to make Robbies. You can have lots of robots or whatever. But if that exploratory, ship had never turned up, would he ever have made contact with Earth to start sharing some of this technology, or would it have just been lost to time and, forgotten?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I've never contemplated that. My guess is he probably would not have made contact with her. Although, he certainly not for himself. The whole business with the daughter is very interesting. And we'll get into that. But I mean, there is this discussion of her expectation that she's going to go to Earth, that she's not going to be raised just by her father alone. And she's clearly of the age where, she has, already become a sexual being, and she's an adult, and she has had no human contact except for her father and, this robot who provides everything for her. And I think, that's often a source of, a bit of charm for me, especially the bathing sequence where she's bathing in the nude and she seems to have no embarrassment. It's very much a sort of reference to Eden and sort of before the fall, as is the whole like peaceable kingdom thing with the animals not being scared of her. Then there's that weird tiger that like attacks her. presumably because she's become sexual now,
Yeah.
which is a little strange. But yeah, I mean, it seems as if I keep wanting to call him Prospero, but Morbius, has sort of promised her that they're either going to go to Earth or he's going to send her away to Earth. But you can tell he doesn't really want to do that. I mean, he wants to stay there and devote his life to science, and he doesn't seem especially keen on getting that technology to Earth. If for no other reason than that means somebody's going to come and bother him, right? You think so too?
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I did wonder, sort of like, because when he does say, when there's that conversation later in the film between him and Commander Adams about this sort of the notion of giving up the technology or drip feeding the technology, even that drip feeding seems reluctant. It's he says, well, I will rely on my own conscience and judgment as to what I will give up and when, sort of thing. And that sort of was almost like all right, I'm sort of caught between rock and a hard place here. I'm going to have to negotiate, or I'm going to have to compromise. And the compromise is, I will tell you when you can have this technology, which sort of tells me that his initial position was, you're not having any of it. But again, like I said, with his daughter, that there clearly has been, like, she understands. She's not shocked to see other human beings, but she obviously has a concept of Earth, but then she has no concept of almost like social norms or social graces. And so there are several things that sort of, the bathing scene is interesting because she seems pretty clever. Like, she's quite astute. Like, there's actually a conversation between her and Commander Adams at one point where she's been kissing and cuddling with some of the crew, and she's like, I don't see what the problem is. And his response is like, these guys have been locked up for 1.5 years with nothing to do. Like, this is a fully male crew, and you don't understand that sort of you are basically sort of putting he is almost telling it, you're putting yourself at risk by tempting these guys. But he almost turns it around on her and says it's your own fault, which is where I think that of its time it becomes difficult. But she picks up on it and she says, okay, well, next time then I want a dress that covers all the way down to the floor and it covers me up and da da da. So she's not daft. Like, she clearly is quite astute, but she's naive. And so again, like, she could have been played as a ditz, as a bit of a fluff piece. But they clearly, even though there was some blatant sexism in this, they still try and give her a little bit of agency, like a bit of independence in the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. She certainly, I mean, nobody would watch this and say she's stupid.
No.
Right? She's clearly intelligent. She's clearly supposed to be innocent. But you're right. She is astute. I mean, she's not dumb. She's also apparently had access to biological records, so she understands reproduction. She just doesn't know. I mean, I think the kissing scene is sort of funny, like, how she just doesn't react over and over again. Yeah. It's like, this is very strange. But I mean, and you're right that I mean, obviously it seems a little sexist that she would one of the most important things she does in the film is craft a dress, to please a man. But it's all sort of charming in the sense that she doesn't seem to understand really what's being said. Yeah, I mean, it's very strange, the treatment of her. Also the way that she, falls in love. She just seems very abrupt, right? Yeah. I mean, the tiger attacks her, and then she's fallen in love, and this character who seems, in some ways, rather feminist. And I agree with you about that sort of implicit, like, it's your fault, yes. Right? Like, these guys, they can't control themselves. You're not wearing a burqa, so what do you expect, right? But on the other hand, she seems very feminist in the sense that she's not embarrassed by nudity. She's clearly aware of reproduction, feels no shame about that in particular. She does seem naive, but also confident and intelligent. But then love brings her down, right? I mean, this is the classic sort of old-fashioned kind of noir thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, a woman can be intelligent, she could be the best doctor in the world, but then she falls in love, and then she like, all I want is to be a housewife to this wonderful man.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Like you said, throughout the film, she shows a level. She, like you said, confident is a good term for it. That she has like a level of confidence. Like she's on her home turf to begin with, but like she is confident around around the crew and around the ship. Like none of this seems to phase her hugely. Like she just takes it in her stride, which is really impressive, really. But then, like I say, then all of a sudden, like towards the third act, like she falls in love and with Commander Adams, and all of a sudden, then she's just clinging to his arm, and all that sort of that's out the window. All that confidence and that bolster is out the window, and she's now, like I say, the sort of she just becomes the female character to save, almost like the motivation for them to get to the end, which is a little disappointing, but it's also, let's say, it's very typical. That's the way the stories were told, and I'm not using that as an excuse, but it is. That's just the way the stories were told. That's the role that the female role in these films, I suppose.
Right, and I think it's also, I mean, it's fascinating watching it and sort of thinking about the worldview that it is expressing. Obviously the sort of climax is very focused on psychology, right? Mm-hmm. Monsters from the id, right? And so there's this idea that obviously that's Freudian, it comes from Freud, but there's this kind of classic idea, especially for the period, that civilization is like what keeps us from just going out and raping and killing nonstop, right? That's what we would do. That's the state of nature. And, we're sort of forced to be civilized and get along. And, here are all of these rules. And there's even the line, we're all monsters in our subconscious. So we have laws and religion, right? Yeah. So civilization keeps us from acting out on these things. And so all these male characters, I mean, it is hilarious to me how, they just go after her. The lieutenant, who no sooner do they meet her than he goes over to her, instantly cockblocks the other two related, the only two men on the planet who aren't related to her, just instantly lies about them to be like, well, that commander can't be trusted, like instantly. Oh, there's a hot girl in the room. Everybody converges on her and starts playing their various strategies. And the commander wins because he's confident but standoffish. And it's also sort of like, like the old comic thing, right? Like the team leader always got the girl. But that seems to also fit into this idea of psychology and the id that, men are going to want to do this, right? Men are aggressive, and just beneath the surface, they want to get drunk. They want to, get this girl. They really can't be trusted when let loose, despite all the civilization, despite hyperdrive, despite everything else.
Well, that's an interesting point, because one of the things, we say about this film, and again, I mentioned, you could see it as misogynistic because, an all-male crew traveling through space, that kind of thing, and she's the single, like you say, innocent sort of female. But this crew is no different. Like, it doesn't, this crew is not portrayed in an overly, other than probably Commander Adams, and even then, but they're never portrayed in an overly heroic manner. Like you say, the first thing that guy does, he goes over and starts to sort of pull a bit of a Tom Cruise. He starts to flash the smile and pull out the one-liners. And then, the Doctor tries it, and then obviously Commander Adams does it as well. But then you've also got, they're being driven by their lust, as in that subconscious, just that lust is sort of under the surface. And then you've got the cook, who is driven by his, his alcoholism or drunkenness. It would be in the 50s, but he's got his own vices, and they are flawed characters. Like, they are pig-headed, and they are sort of, they've got these vices, and that, the moment when he is it the lieutenant or one of them that he does kiss altar, and he tries to talk her into it, and then he just kisses her, and it just feels like you think, oh, okay, this crew, it could be that they should be played, or they could be played again as that heroic band sort of going across the galaxy to save these colonists, but they're not. They're not. They're really not. They are basically a crew of Navy soldiers that just happen to land in port. At this port has got this one pretty girl and a robot that can produce
Right.
whiskey on tap. So why not?
Yeah, and that fits in with how Morbius isn't such a bad guy. I mean, like you were talking, the crew isn't militaristic. They seem kind of idealistic, but at the same time, they're very flawed people. I think the Navy port thing is brilliant.
It's funny because it's the theme. The biggest theme that I got out of this, really, and it comes across in that thing of because there's an interesting comment at the end, which really brought to surface, is that idea that advanced technology we can do all these amazing things. Now, I feel that this is obviously a comment on the advancements of following the Second World War, so like nuclear power and all this other stuff. This is, you could have all this stuff, this amazing things, and you can say that, yes, I am humane, or I am doing this for the best possible reasons, but underneath, we have got all these vices, and we've got all these sort of, our id is actually going to drive us to use this for the wrong purpose. And that's why, as we are human, and we have to be better to use the advances in technology that we're coming across. And it's the line he used actually which is quite funny. He says about the Krell, the thing they forgot is the subconscious. And he says something about being human. You think, well, they're not, they're alien. So they apply humanity to an ancient alien species, which is interesting. But it's true, and that's the theme that really struck home to me. Was we've even true today. We've got this massively advanced technology. I have got at my fingertips now. I've got several devices sat around me. I have got the knowledge of the eons, the knowledge of the world at my fingertips. I'll probably look at boobs at some point.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is the classic, right, post-war kind of atomic age message, right? Like, we can blow up the world, but we haven't learned how to live with one another. Yeah. But so it's a little cliche, but it is true. And I think about the same thing. You're right. I mean, we've got these cell phones. And, it's funny what ages and how you sort of see the representation of technology. Like, there is a point where I think, like, okay, you have hyperdrive, but Robbie, a robot that looks, I love his design, right? Obviously he was famous, he was reused forever in every single show, right? But he looks like he was designed by the Michelin Man. You mean to tell me you have hyperdrive, but Robbie is just beyond known tech. And he's got a food synthesizer. I mean, there is some advanced stuff. He knows lots of languages, but he still looks kind of primitive. And it reminds me of how, like, you've got tablet computers in Star Trek: The Next Generation, right? But we have those now, and you guys have, like, light speed and teleportation, right? You guys got the sequencing a little wrong here. And so I think of that when I think of, okay, so we don't have the teleporter, right? I mean, we don't have outer space travel. We're not flying on rocket ships to Alpha Centauri yet. And when we do, it certainly won't look like a 50s flying saucer. But, but having said that, I mean, the cell phone, we got cell phones, right? I mean, we got reliable vehicles that, have better gas mileage than anything we could imagine. I mean, we have so many advantages. I mean, food is better. I mean, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, half the steak you got was filled with sawdust. So, I mean, life is so much better. But then you think, I mean, what are we doing? I love video games, but, we're watching porn and playing video games. It's not exactly what we were promised.
No, it's true, and I think that's the thing. Is like you say, this film is. I think this film remains relevant for that very reason, isn't it? Technology is always going to be prevalent. Look, it's just a part of our lives now. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you and I are sat down now, and we're 6 hours apart, by time zones, but we are using a website to talk to each other online, and record this podcast. Like, the technology is amazing. We've got some real crazy advances, yet, as you say, we're still relying on like plastic carry bags or fossil fuels. And I mean, I'm not going to start kicking on the environment message, but this sort of you do think like, okay, we're probably pressing our advances in the wrong places at times. And that's what this film is saying. It says that, I could give you the world, I could give you, eons worth of technology, but you're probably going to, use it poorly.
Well, it's the old adage that I mean, even if we don't go in for the sort of 1950s full extent of that sort of view of humanity, I mean, we are animals, and the primary things that humans do are, we eat, we shit, we have sex, right? I mean, these are primary drivers. The idea that we are talking about art or thinking about philosophy or, upset that we haven't gotten to another solar system yet, which angers me every day, is not our primary drivers. And, I mean, that's a problem. And it is a problem. But, yeah, I mean, this is that kind of classic theme, like, I mean, I don't know that I really agree that, there is this separate id underneath everything that just is waiting to go insane. And, it's a separate unconscious that the most, it also sort of reminds me of the Vulcans, right? I mean, like the most sophisticated, emotionless, advanced civilization, you hook them up to a device that makes thoughts reality, and they're going to conjure, like a rape and kill monster,
Yeah, it is. It's funny. I mean, they obviously have tried to do this. That analogy, actually, the Vulcans is obviously really relevant with this influencing Star Trek. And how often did they do that in original Trek, or even like down the line? This thing of sort of like, yes, well, the Vulcans are pure logic, and they've reached a point in their philosophy and ideology where emotion doesn't involve it. But does Spock's half human, so underneath that, it's the human part of him that is his flawed side, and it's sort of simmering with rage all the time and that sort of thing. And yeah, it's sometimes handled better than other times, but it's true, isn't it? This idea that they have to try and make it almost the that alter ego that, okay, you've got your ego or super ego, as they explain in this, and then you've just got this id, and it goes back to the simple things of like Jekyll and Hyde, or that notion of the extremes of like in social this and those similar things would have you believe that take away any sort of form of social mores or social sort of like construct, like you say, we would just be animals that would be like raping, pillaging and killing each other. And I just don't think that's true. It's one of the things, like, I enjoy the Purge series. I think that there's some merit in that film. I think they're quite entertaining and they're very silly, and I can't see that happening. Do you know what I mean? The Purge. I'll be perfectly honest with you. Given the opportunity, I honestly think the majority of people are just too lazy. Where they're like, "Oh, I've got to be up, committing crime all night. Oh, I can't miss Game of Thrones. I've got stuff planned. I know. I'm not going out. Yeah."
Yeah, I mean, this is a very British view of the Purge, right? Like, well, we have the right to do these things, but, we'd have to get off the couch and stop watching.
If it was midweek, I mean, granted, if it was the weekend, it might be different. We'd have just. The other thing is, if it was Britain, if all crime was legal, everyone would just go to the bar and just drink. That's what would happen. There'd be no crime because everyone would be in a stupor by 10 o'clock. So it'd actually probably be the quietest for the time for the police at all. They'd be like, okay, they've just broken into a pub and drank everything. Leave them to it. And then myself just sat at home thinking, like you say, it's a bit cold outside. I've got to be up early in the morning to walk the dog, so I can't be bothered, to be honest. But yeah, no, I just don't believe
right.
that id is that prevalent. I could be wrong. I might be, but.
No, I know. No, I mean you're right, and there are. I mean, this gets down to. I mean, I do want to talk about religion because I mean I think it stands out so much in this film, and one of the founding the arguments of the era of the founding fathers of my country was that most of them were not
Hmm.
Christians, and they believed that religion served a social function, that it had exactly this kind of like repressive, cohesive benefit, right? It brought a community together and kept people behaving
Mm.
better, which is really a view articulated by this film. But we actually do know that people who don't believe don't behave any worse, and religion does give people the excuse to it may not make people behave worse, but it certainly does allow them to excuse some of the worst behavior the planet has ever seen. So I mean, we do seem to know now that we have a kind of like moral compass in our
Mm.
brain, right? I mean, dogs, there are these experiments with dogs where they are shown puppets, and one puppet is nice and helps the other puppet animal, and the other one is violent, and the dogs will bark at the mean hedgehog, and then when the hedgehog shows up, when the owner is there, the dogs will bark and like alert the owner, like that is a bad dude, do not trust that hedgehog
Yeah.
puppet, and we do seem to have fairness in certain ways in our brain, um, and I mean, I used to tell my students like the best reason to be good is so you can sleep
Mm.
at night. Um, when you're mean to people when you're a kid and you grow up and you're an adolescent, you kind of start, you get a little older and you start realizing like, yeah, I could steal, these $5 that's just sitting there, but I'm not going to feel good about it. I'm going to remember that for years. And what did I get out of that? $5?
Yeah.
The purge doesn't make me feel good. I'm gonna remember these horrible things that I've done. They're gonna haunt me.
It's interesting. I agree because just because you're allowed to do them doesn't mean that like you say, that you can do them. It's funny that there was I listened to a podcast a long time ago that sort of about this. It said actually there's an evolutionary reason for acting morally, for acting right, because if you are seen as acting beyond or counter to a group's morals, then you're going to be ostracized. That group will push you
Mhm.
out, whether it be prison or whatever. Um, and from an evolutionary point of view, like you can't survive on your own. You need to be part of a social group. So actually, to act, in accordance with the morality of that group, actually is also it has an evolutionary driver of like, okay, well, if I'm going to survive, my genes are going to survive. I need to be a part of the group. So there's, I say there's psychological, and sort of evolutionary reasons as to why the id isn't just our sort of raging, almost default setting.
Right. I agree with that. And there are also like, I mean, there are these, you do the experiment where you say you don't know what the other person is going to get, and you either lose all the money, or if or they could
Mm.
take it all, right? And you find out that it's round about 60, 70, 65, 70% of the time, if the other person gets that amount of the money, because they have the advantage position in this game, you think, okay, that's close enough to fair. But when it starts getting up to like 80, people will say, no, I'm throwing away my
Mm.
money rather than let you take all of this. And there seems to be these thresholds like that. I mean, I think you're completely right about evolution and the social role of this. But I also think there seem to be these kind of like thresholds at which um, just societies have to take care of people, and if you feel as if this is just fundamentally unfair, you start getting revolution, right? You start getting violence, and people just saying, well, why should I be following the social contract if I'm getting 10 cents for every 90 that you're getting, and we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's thing this there has to be a certain level of equality, across the board for like you say within thresholds and this sort of thing for it, I suppose, for it to even feel like that morality has a purpose. And again, I think that sort of calls into question a few things that, obviously when you look around you today, this idea of the sort of the social gaps and things, and you sort of wonder why people do get pulled into different things, and you think, oh, it's not, like you said, how do you sleep with yourself? And sometimes you think, well, actually, it's probably one of the only avenues they've got open to them in order to feed their family, or it may then be the norms of that group and that sort of thing. So, it seems it could, I suppose it's quite a simplistic view. Especially, let's say, when you're taking it back to that religious idea as well. The religious idea, as you said, using the as an example, an excuse really for many things, is that thing of like, well, within my religion, within my sort of structure, the morality is this, and this, and part of that is that yours is different, so you're wrong, and so in some cases it actually sets up conflict which are completely contradictory to the social morality you're trying to set. That thing, they say, I'm not going to say 10 Commandments or that, but it sort of says love thy neighbour and all these other bits and pieces. But one thing I've always said is it's love thy neighbour except those people there or those ones there. Or, do you know what I mean? It's sort of, it's interesting, how that sort of can be shifted to be appropriate for whatever group or whoever actually wants to be sort of at the top of the chain on that one.
Right, and I think that these commandments and these passages in our holy books or our revered sources are always selectively chosen, right? I mean, and they're selectively chosen to justify what we want to do or the way we think things should be, already. But I think that one way in which this movie is not like Star Trek is that religious angle. Because it's 99% of the time it's Star Trek is an atheistic future, and Roddenberry was very clear about that. Even if not all writers carried that through, there are occasional references, but right away when they get to the Altair, a crew member says, "The Lord sure makes some beautiful world." It just seems like, okay, that's not going to be in Star Trek, right? They're burying a crew member and they say ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And you think, oh, okay, right? And then, there's that line of we're all monsters in our subconscious. So we have laws and religion, which seems to me to be like, when religious people cite this, I think, well, that's as good as saying, I don't believe this, but I think it has social efficacy. So, and then you have the end of the movie where the last line is like, reminding us that we are all of God, which has nothing to do with anything you've just seen.
No, one of the things is one of the things they learn in this film, and I don't know, say there's the Federation of Planets or whatever, it's the unification of planets. So you don't know anything much about that. So I don't know if they already know of alien life, but they are introduced to alien life in this film. And at no point does that sort of like raise any questions or sort of, anybody sort of it waver their belief system or anything like that. It's just sort of taken in stride a little bit, which I find, like you say, and then they fall back into that position of like, well, God, we are all God's children in the end. And you sort of go, okay, well, I'd like to see what their belief system was, and what would the Krell have said about that? That they appear to have made themselves beings of pure thought.
Right. Well, also, like, well, what does that even mean? I mean, if we are all of God, right? Like, okay, our crew members, if a handful of them are dead, the Bellerophon's crew is entirely dead. This entire civilization that is more advanced. I mean, they say 1 million years. If humans survive another 1 million years, maybe we'll get to what the Krell are like, right? Where was God for them? Right? Like, we're talking about not just worse than genocide. I mean, specieside of a spectacularly more advanced race that has way more right to exist than humans do. And, and we're watching that beautiful world that the Lord sure makes some beautiful world blow up. And your response to that is, well, we're all of God.
Well, it also raises a simple question of for me, then this is posing the question, or at least the hypothesis, that actually, every civilization that as it advances is advancing towards its own destruction. Because it says that humans will advance toward, we can advance towards this too, and you think, what, towards annihilation? I'm all right. I'm happy if we don't, thank you. But in that, again, say, if that's the case, of like, where's that divinity then? Is it that's just fate? That's just what we're supposed to do? It's that seems more interesting. Of sort of that thing of species side, they've completely wiped themselves out, and we're then saying, but we could get there too. And you're sort of like, not sure how that marries up. That comes to another point actually that you really just popped in my head. Was this idea of sort of the idea of colonialism and the appropriation of other cultures. So, and it's not a heavy thing in this. It's not because that's quite a relatively new concept, I suppose, to be articulated. But in this, like, they are quite happy to go in and say, okay, well, the Krell have been wiped out for he says 2,000 centuries. So it's almost like between 200 plus thousand years. And we're happy just to take all their technology and we're going to sort of do all this other stuff. But at no point does anyone stop to say, well, what do we know about them? Where's their, we're literally going to take on technology that we have no idea about or what it was for or what it meant to them or anything like that. What was its cultural purpose? It is literally just almost like a bag. It's swag bagging, isn't it? Go in and see what we can take. And that feels incredibly sort of imperialistic and very sort of colonialistic of that you would think would be left behind by this point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that because I love this question, but I don't know about that because I mean, for one thing, they're the Krell are the more advanced civilization, right? So, and they're already dead, right? So it's kind of like we're picking through the ruins. They don't seem to ask adequate questions about Krell society, like what was life like for these people. They're far more concerned with, hey, how does that brain booster work, and is it really going to kill you? They are dazzled, and I definitely feel the sense of wonder at the civilization. But one of the things that I like most in the movie is the first thing of the Krell that you're ever shown is, I mean, if you don't count Robbie, as Krell influence, is music that Morbius plays, and it's this sort of like slightly discordant, kind of weird sort of music, very sort of sci-fi. And I think he says like, a child composed this, I mean, there's this constant, like, they're so much more advanced. But I mean, hearing this question about sort of imperialism makes me wonder, I mean, if the humans, have no moral compunction about just, like, basically this is like the equivalent of like, let's raid King Tut's tomb, like just smash the door open, like just take it.
That's exactly
the
the comparison I was thinking. I was like, this is basically like, say, Imperial Britain turning up in Egypt and North Africa and just going, oh, that's shiny. We're having some of that in our British Museum. It's sort of, that was the parallel I was thinking. It was that notion of just rocking up to a civilization and or a culture and just going, what's that shiny bauble you've got over there? How we're having it, sort of thing. That's exactly what I was doing with it. So it's in, yeah. Yeah,
well, I mean, they're still fighting over the Parthenon stones, right? Yeah, I mean, and this has happened all over the world, but I mean, it does sort of imply that there's no morality there, right? Like, if the Krell were still around, could you really object then if the Krell were like, we're just going to enslave you humans, or, we want to go to your planet. We want that water. We're just going to drain your oceans. The humans couldn't really object since they don't seem to raise a single moral question about, raiding Tut's tomb here.
Which is interesting, like you say, because there were so many other films that do play it the other way of the advanced civilization arriving on our doorstep and invading from War of the Worlds to Independence Day to I suppose any others really. The one you say about the water being taken, I forget the name of the one that Tom Cruise did. It was very similar to like Moon and that sort of thing. But yeah, the idea is there. We have this moralistic thing of like the invader, and I know it's obviously used as an allegory, but I just thought it was quite interesting that idea of sort of there's no, like I say, compunction about sort of like I say raiding the tomb without any taking someone's gold is one thing, but taking technology driven by a nuclear reactor from an alien species felt a little bit sort of like, oh, okay, well, be careful what buttons you're pressing because I'm not sure what they're going to do.
Yeah, it's pretty clear they don't know either. I mean, Morbius is just sort of, practiced trial and error. And, he was like, unconscious for a day and a half after he used that brain scanner thing, right? So there is a kind of like reckless, sort of Indiana Jones sort of raiding the, sort of more intellectual version of that, just sort of raiding this stuff. At the same time, I mean, if you were there, I mean, I'm going to go through that. I'm going to wander through this stuff, and I might be a little more conscious about what buttons I press, but I mean, I don't know that I would, I mean, I might ask those moral questions, but I'm not sure that I would not want to explore all of this. This stuff is amazing.
It's true. And I have to say that you mentioned the brain scanner, that introduces possibly my favourite part of the film is, Morbius sits down and he shows he can generate that image, of his daughter, and it shows a sort of like almost like a barometer, sort of showing how intelligent or the capability of his brainwaves. And then Dr. Osto sits down and tries it, and it goes up, but not as far as Morbius. And he's like, "Oh, okay, well done." And then Commander Adams sits down, and it barely moves, and he says, "Well, it's a good job it doesn't take intellect to run a ship, just a loud voice and authority." You're just like, wow, that's taking a bit of a dig there. But again,
and that's very on Star Trek, right? I mean, that's also very countercultural for the 1950s, right? I mean, when in America in the 50s, the whole idea was the best people are in charge and you trust your government. And there was kind of some countercultural currents, but it wasn't until the 1960s that, it became okay to just say, yeah, maybe those people are dumb.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I honestly feel like this definitely has some sort of like, I'd say early counterculture themes running it, because Commander Adams isn't, he is that sort of shouty leader. Like, yes, he sort of has he's shown to be a good man, but he's probably not as open-minded as we will get from Kirk or some of the others. I mean, he's not going to reach Picard standards, but it is that thing of sort of like that. The Dr. Osto is shown to be a slightly better, more intelligent and probably sort of a more understanding person. But even he makes the snap call because he runs off to try and use that brain thing to boost his own brain power when no one's looking. So again, there's that voice, that sort of flaw in his character. It's like, once I've got a chance, I'll go do it. Which again I find really interesting that no one in this film is particularly portrayed as a good guy or a bad guy. They're just people, I suppose, really.
Yeah, and they're all flawed, and but I think that's part of this sort of like worldview, right? I mean, it's that whole theme of Monsters of the Id that you can have all of this civilization, but you're always, I mean, it's the Frankenstein monster thing, right? It's the atomic war thing. You're always at battle with this animalistic self just below the surface, or integrated at best with displaced into space voyaging. I mean, Kirk, I will say, I mean, I am reminded of Kirk with the Leslie Nielsen character, but I mean, Kirk is a little more headstrong and a little more just like prone to have he's got to have a fist fight every episode, right? And he would have been the more aggressive one. I mean, it's interesting that Kirk Kirk would have been the one who, like, made a beeline for
Yes,
Alpha,
yeah.
and was like, and Francis is on this planet, I'm getting that,
Yeah, he would have, like, kicked the legs out from under Spock and just sort of barged McCoy out the way and be like, no, me first, me first. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, no, as I say, going back and watching this film, I have really appreciated like how much of an influence this has clearly had on like so many films, not just Star Trek, but like you can see those sort of the cliches or things that we consider the cliches now. May not have been born out of this, but are definitely born out of this era, and this is one of those first sort of things of the like that thing that this is that Earth thing you call kissing, or that straight from that sort of thing straight through to the idea of the alien technology that is beyond our advances and that sort of thing. It's all these things that will come up again and again in sci-fi tropes. Do seem to be born. Probably I realised for the first time well in this film.
Yeah. And then there's also, the idea of the sort of like alien planet that's in Eden, but there's a snake,
Yes.
right? There's a problem. And I also thought of, although we've talked a lot about Star Trek, that hologram, I thought, boy, that's right out of A New Hope, right? Help me, Obi-Wan. It looks remarkably similar despite being 20 plus years early.
Well, that's the thing. Also, we'll probably round out with some of the special effects stuff, because I have to say, you said it before, like, the special effects in this are really solid for the era. I mean, I love the idea. I love matte paintings. I love the stop motion animation. But even like what could be considered silly, like the blasters. They call them blasters as well. That's definitely a Star Wars thing. But the blue and the red sort of colouring and stuff from the blasters, all the way through to the monster from the id when he gets caught in that frame in the energy field, and it's just an outline. I love all that stuff. It looks so good, and yes, it looks like it's aged, but still, like I'm so enjoying it that when I'm seeing that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Me too. And I love those matte paintings too. It's really a lost art. But that's another thing that I always enjoyed. Even as a kid in Star Trek was they'd go to another planet and I get that wonderful matte painting, and now they're all updated digitally. In the revised original series episodes that they've done, but. Boy, those matte paintings, it's amazing what was done with them. And nowadays they just do it all digitally, and it still kind of looks fake. It looks a little too glossy. And the perspective is never quite as good as you imagine people painting, and they would get this sense of perspective and the sense of scale and size that just the mind instantly is just boggled by and wondered, put in a state of wonder by. I love, even beyond the Krell base, the mountains around the flying saucer landing site are just beautiful.
That scene, yes, it's a very 50s looking sort of flying saucer, but that landing sequence is great. It's so good because it disrupts the sand. It's got all that, but that matte painting, like you say, it's so well framed. So when it does land in the middle, you still got the mountains either side of it. You got the red sky, and you've got it's wonderful. It's so well done. And the things when I was looking into some of this, the things I found out was that this is produced by MGM at the time, and they were taking a bit of a risk on this, but when it was being shopped around and people were starting to see some of the stuff that was coming out of it, they were so impressed that when it came to animating things like the creature from the id and the blasters and that sort of thing, Walt Disney himself actually gave up the time of some of his animators to MGM for them to go do the special effects. So this was clearly impressing people in the day as well. So it's those sort of things stand up. I think you can, it's worth seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like to me, it always seems silly to praise something for the special effects, right? Because we do that so often, and we say, and I think, like, oh, congratulations, you've told me nothing about the story or why to see this, right? But I mean, there are films, whether it's, I think really like Terminator 2 is largely praised for the special effects. That lots of movies, are not just special effects. There's more than that we praise them for, but that is inherently wedded to their appeal, and I think that is true of this movie too. But those special effects they work so much, and I will take these special effects over, a lot of far more recent, far better in a sense. I mean, that monster, when he's hitting the wires and you sort of see this electrical outline. I mean, it does look cheesy and dated, but the blasters kind of, I find myself wondering, like, they're not firing very fast. Like those bolts of energy, are sort of moving like 100 times slower than a bullet would. But it still looks cool. I mean, it looks fine.
It's to me, it's the same thing. It sort of stands on par with things like Ray Harryhausen. That when he is at his best, and you see things like Jason the Argonauts or something, the Sinbad films I talk about, like, that it's not as good as some of the stuff that's probably appearing in sort of, like you say, the Marvel movies or the latest fantasy sci-fi film. But there's such an appreciation for how much effort and the dedication that's gone into it, really, for me, that I'm just enjoying it. It looks great, and I'm buying into it. And it's the same thing for this. I sort of think that, as you said before, they couldn't rely on special effects. I mean, in digital effects, so everything in this is practical. And I'd say that a lot of it obviously is in camera and that sort of thing, and then they've done all the clever film camera trickery later on to add things or do perspectives and that sort of thing. And I just think from a filmmaking perspective, it's really, I've got to respect that level of dedication.
Yeah, I mean, while you were talking, I agree completely. While you were talking, I was also thinking that the special effects change the shot, right? I mean, one of the reasons why, probably we like matte paintings is that they lend themselves to the wide shot. And when I think about, I mean, if you do a CGI monster like this, you'll have the shot of, him rippling with energy, but then you're going to get all these stupid close-ups. We have no idea, just sort of like, what's going on. The monster from the deep is rising, and it's shot as if it were a human being, because you can just do it in the computer now. And so, you've got a close up on his face as, he swings a punch or something, and you lose that sense of scale, right? You're not going for the wide shot. And, it's even true in like the, Jurassic World versus Jurassic Park, that the original is composed much more carefully, because some of the dinosaurs were practical and some were CG, but there's such a sense of, you let them be composed well in the panel, in the frame. And I always feel, especially with monsters in the fantastic and wide shots, or you see a city, I want that wide shot. I want to take it all in and be wowed by it. I don't want to, cut to these close-ups and, have this kind of rapid cutting. That doesn't give me a sense of wonder in the same way.
No, I agree. I totally agree. And I think it's sort of, as you said before, though, it's like a lost art. That thing of now they've got the capability to do all these things, in close-ups. And as you were saying it, I was thinking of certain films where they do it. And, I was thinking like the Transformers films, which are horrendous for that reason, that they, where it could be better as a big wide shot and it'd be really dramatic, but they zoom in and they've got to show all the bleeding parts moving and this and that. You're just like, it's a lost art. So no, though, let's round out the episode there. So Julian, before we answer, what
Yep.
are your final thoughts on 1956's Forbidden Planet?
Well, it's a classic. It set the stage for so much to come, and more than anything, it is enjoyable. It's it's charming. Maybe there are a few sort of slower parts, but not painfully so. And if you find yourself sort of groaning a little at the alcohol or the treatment of Altera, it's still interesting and well done and well shot and smart. It's got something to say. I'm just in love with this movie.
Yeah, I've got to say, I think as a final thought, I think it's going back to it. I really enjoyed it. It has got its kitsch moments. It's definitely sort of its time, but it definitely feels like a step beyond the B movie sort of 50s sci-fi that I'm used to seeing of this era. So it definitely still feels relevant. The fact that we're able to talk about it and sort of relate it to things that are going on, like this film doesn't miss a beat in that it feels that it has something to say. It does it in a very clever way, and actually, like I say, but it's still got those fun pulpy elements just to keep you entertained, and it looks great. So no, I was happily surprised going back to this, and I'd definitely recommend it to people that want to explore the genre.
Yeah, I mean it's a staple. We've started with it for a reason. You can't watch no sci-fi film without
Definitely.
this.
Yeah, like I say, the influence on this. Anybody, if you're gonna be watching along with us, and I think that may be a way of going with this because we are going to be spoiling the crap out of some of these films that are coming up, and some of them you've seen and some you probably haven't. So I recommend that you watch with us. Go back and see this and do appreciate it as to what it's contributed to the discussion of sci-fi and how it can be a commentary of society. So that's Forbidden Planet. Now let's just quickly give some future information. So I'm going to be putting out on social media. So if you want to find us on social media, I have to remember what we're called now. So it's obviously stories. It's got to come up now. There you go. So Stories Out of Time and Space Pod on Twitter, and that's at Pod Time Space. If you want to find us, we'll be putting out the rest of the films that we're going to be looking at in this season. But the next one we're going to be looking at, Julian, this is one of your choices. So please explain a little bit, give us a snippet of Solaris and what we're going to be looking at next time.
All right. Well, Solaris is a Russian film from 1971, and I believe it's over 3 hours. It is very slow. I'm gonna really sell this. It's in Russian. It's very slow, but it is absolutely incredibly influential, especially among sort of artsy, intellectual sci-fi people. There's a reason it was remade with George Clooney. The influence of this, and especially its depiction of extraterrestrial contact, is absolutely brilliant and incredibly influential.
Yeah, I have to admit, when you first put it on the list, and you said Solaris, I had to clarify that you meant the 70s version. I was like, oh, so we're going to be talking George Clooney this early into the podcast. I'm really intrigued by this one, so it's going to be an interesting one. I think it's going to generate a really interesting discussion. So, just it's available to rent on Amazon Prime, and I'm sure you could probably find it on Blu-ray if anyone out there has got it, or on DVD. So check it out, and on the next episode, we're going to be talking about Solaris. So, Julian, thank you very much. I think this was a great discussion, and like I say, I think the next one's going to be a corker as well.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And I'm so thrilled to be doing this, and I hope that people do watch the ones that they haven't seen and kind of follow along with us, and talk to us on social media, because we will respond to that and love.
Definitely, yeah. Reach out to find us. Reach out and let us know what you think about Forbidden Planet. And And any other sci-fi films that you think we should be covering down the line, let us know what the ones that you want to see us talk about. Okay.
I've already secretly started forming a short list.
to be honest, so have I. So I think we've got a long way to go. There's some fantastic films for us to cover, and I'll be honest, some are probably up there as being sort of well worthy of discussion. Some I just think I want to talk about this film because it's ridiculous. So
That's awesome.
Okay, guys, thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.